It is December. The year is 1992. You are 8 years old, and your parents have dragged the whole family to the movie theater on a Friday night because there is a new movie out and everybody at school has been talking about it for weeks. The lobby smells like popcorn and that particular brand of winter coat dampness that only happens in December, that wet wool and cold air combination that is somehow the most comforting smell in the world when you are young and it is Christmas and the entire universe feels like it is leaning toward magic. You find your seat in the dark. The trailers roll. The lights go all the way down. And then the screen fills with the image of a little blonde boy, alone again, stepping out into one of the most electric, overwhelming, staggering cities in the entire world. New York City. And the moment you see that little kid standing in the middle of Manhattan, eyes wide like dinner plates, mouth open in pure wonder, this enormous Rockefeller Center Christmas tree blazing behind him like some kind of dream that architecture decided to become, something in your chest just lights up, like a match being struck in a dark room, like the first ornament going on an empty tree. Like that moment on Christmas morning when the lights come on and everything that was dark and ordinary becomes, briefly, extraordinary. That feeling, that specific, irreplaceable, almost physically warm feeling, is the power of Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Now, I want you to stay with me here. I want you to really stay because today we are going deep. We are not just summarizing this movie. We are not just making a list of the trap scenes or laughing at Harry and Marv getting absolutely destroyed for the 100th time in our lives. No, today we are tearing this film completely open. We are going to look at what it really is, what it is really about at its marrow, why it made the choices it made, how it was made, what it cost, what it earned, and most importantly, why more than 30 years after it first hit theaters on a cold November weekend in 1992, it still holds a place in millions of hearts that is almost embarrassingly warm. Why grown adults with mortgages and car payments and complicated tax situations will still, without any irony whatsoever, stop everything they are doing when this movie appears on television in December and watch every single second of it. Because here is the thing that nobody ever really talks about when they talk about Home Alone 2. And this is the thing I want to establish right at the top, before we get into a single frame of the actual story. Yes, there are slapstick traps. Yes, there is a kind of Abbott and Costello spiritual energy running through the relationship between Harry and Marv. Yes, Kevin McAllister remains the most operationally capable 8-year-old in the history of motion pictures, a child who operates with a strategic precision that most adults in the real world could not replicate under significantly less stressful circumstances. Yes, Tim Curry is in this film doing something so theatrically, brilliantly committed with a supporting role that it constitutes a minor masterwork of comedic acting. All of that is real, and all of that is worth celebrating. But underneath all of it, underneath the paint cans and the rubber bricks and the staple guns and the absolutely physics-defying things that happen to two grown men's bodies in the third act, there is a movie about a child who feels completely unseen by the people who are supposed to love him most. A child who escapes, again, into a fantasy of radical independence only to discover, in the process of that escape, that what he actually craves, more desperately than freedom, more urgently than respect, more than being right or being proven capable or being left alone, is belonging. Connection. The feeling of being truly, deeply known by another person and loved not despite who you are but because of it. And that, my friends, is why we are still talking about this movie. That is why 30-plus years of holiday seasons have not dimmed it. That is why it still hits different every single time the snow falls and you find yourself, once again, curled up on a couch while Kevin McAllister checks himself into the Plaza Hotel. Let's get into it. Home Alone 2. Lost in New York was released on November 20th, 1992. Just 2 years, an almost impossibly short window by today's filmmaking standards, after the original Home Alone became not just a hit, but one of the defining pop culture events of the early 1990s. We're talking about a movie that made nearly $477 million worldwide on a production budget of around $18 million. To give you some scale, $477 million in 1990 dollars is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion by contemporary standards. That is not a successful movie. That is a seismic event. That is the kind of result that rewrites the internal logic of an entire studio, that changes how every executive in Hollywood thinks about family comedies for a decade. And when a seismic event that's significant hits the industry, nobody asks whether there should be a sequel. That question has already been answered. The only question is how fast. The answer, in this case, was very fast. Director Chris Columbus returned to the project, the same Chris Columbus who had, prior to the original Home Alone, directed Adventures in Babysitting and Heartbreak Hotel, and who would subsequently go on to helm the first 2 Harry Potter films, giving him arguably the most nostalgically loaded filmography of any director who ever worked primarily in the family and coming-of-age space. Columbus had a gift that is rarer than it sounds. He understood children. Not in a condescending, talking-down way, not in the way that some filmmakers who work in family cinema clearly regard children as a smaller, less complicated form of adult. Columbus understood what it actually felt like to be a child, to be small in a world that was built entirely for people bigger and more powerful than you, to feel the urgency of proving yourself to people who were not always paying attention to the proof. To be terrified and thrilled by the same thing simultaneously, sometimes in the same breath. John Hughes returned as writer and producer. And if you know anything about John Hughes, if you have spent any time at all with the extraordinary body of work he produced from roughly 1983 through the early 1990s, you know that this man was constitutionally incapable of writing a story that didn't have some real emotional marrow buried somewhere inside it. It didn't matter if the surface was comedy or farce or slapstick or broad holiday entertainment. Hughes was always hiding something genuine inside something funny. From Ferris Bueller's Day Off to The Breakfast Club to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, every single one of those films has a moment where the comedy stops and something truthful and human takes its place, and that moment lands harder because of everything that came before it. Home Alone 2 is no different. Hughes built the joke, and then he built the thing underneath the joke that made you remember it. The cast assembled for this sequel is honestly remarkable when you look at it in full. Macaulay Culkin, of course, reprises his role as Kevin McAllister, and at this specific moment in late 1992, Macaulay Culkin was arguably the most famous child in the United States. Not just famous, ubiquitous. Culturally inescapable in a way that is almost impossible to convey to anyone who wasn't alive and paying attention during that particular stretch of American pop culture. This kid was on magazine covers. This kid was on merchandise. This kid's face was on items for sale that had no business having his face on them. The pressure on him to deliver a performance that lived up to the original, to replicate the lightning-in-a-bottle quality of what he'd done in 1990, was the kind of pressure that would have buckled most adult professionals, let alone a 12-year-old. Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern return as Harry and Marv, now styling themselves the Sticky Bandits rather than the Wet Bandits. A rebranding that Marv in particular seems extraordinarily invested in and Harry tolerates with the world-weary exhaustion of a man who has given up on having standards for himself or anyone else in his life. Their comic chemistry is one of the genuine, irreplaceable pleasures of this franchise. A kind of perfectly calibrated comedic partnership that gives each of them a distinct register to play in while making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Catherine O'Hara returns as Kevin's mother Kate, and she is given considerably more emotional material to work with in this film than she was in the original, which she handles with a grace and a quiet authenticity that elevates every scene she's in. John Hurd is back as Peter McAllister, Kevin's father, though the film unfortunately gives him remarkably little to do, which is a real waste of a talented actor. And the extended McAllister family, that glorious, chaotic, beautiful disaster of aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings, returns in all its overwhelming, bickering, unconditionally loving glory. But then there are the new additions to this particular world, and they are spectacular in ways that each deserve specific attention. Tim Curry as Mr. Hector, the Plaza Hotel concierge, brings a kind of theatrical, slow-building comic disdain to the role that is almost operatic in its precision. This is a man who has devoted his professional life, his entire identity, it seems, to the seamless, elegant, above-reproach operation of the finest hotel in Manhattan, and he regards Kevin McAllister with the specific, escalating suspicion of someone who knows that something is deeply wrong with a situation but cannot, with professional certainty, prove it yet. The comedy of that, the gap between what Hector knows in his gut and what he can actually demonstrate, is something Curry plays with real, committed brilliance. Rob Schneider appears as Cedric the bellhop, perpetually bewildered, perpetually outmaneuvered, perpetually in possession of fewer clues about what is happening around him than everyone in the audience. And then there is the pigeon lady, the bird woman of Central Park, a character who arrives with no fanfare and very little warning and proceeds, quietly and without any melodrama, to provide the film with its most genuine emotional heartbeat. Her performance is subdued and authentic in a way that almost feels like it belongs to a different, quieter film, which is precisely why it works so perfectly as a counterweight to everything loud and broad and slapstick around it. And then there is, of course, the 30-second cameo that has become perhaps the most discussed 30 seconds in the entire Home Alone franchise. A real estate mogul named Donald Trump, then owner of the Plaza Hotel, pointing Kevin in the direction of the lobby. In 1992, this was nothing, a blink-and-miss-it location courtesy appearance, the kind of thing that happens when a production films on private property and the property owner requests a brief acknowledgement. In 2025, after everything that has happened in between, it occupies a very different kind of space in cultural memory. Surreal in a way that no screenwriter could have engineered on purpose. But we are not a political channel, and this is not a political discussion. It is simply a moment in a film that means something different now than it did then, and that difference is worth noting before we move forward. The film was made on a production budget of approximately $28 million, significantly larger than the original's $18 million, and it ultimately grossed around $359 million worldwide, a number that, in any reasonable context, represents a staggering commercial success. Slightly below the original ceiling, yes, but $359 million worldwide in 1992 is a number that put this film among the highest-grossing releases of that entire year. Critics at the time were more divided than they had been about the first film. The word retread appeared in many reviews, accompanied by observations about formula and diminishing returns, and the inherent challenge of sequelizing something that worked precisely because it felt fresh and unexpected. But the audience, the families who were actually purchasing tickets and filling theaters on cold December weekends, told a different story. They loved it, and not just with the passive approval of people who were entertained. They loved it with the kind of active, return-to-repeatedly affection that turns a movie into a tradition. Now, let's talk about what actually happens in this movie, because we are going in all the way, and I mean all the way, every corner, every scene, every emotional beat, every paint can. If you haven't seen this film yet, and if you haven't, I'm going to gently but firmly suggest you close this video, go watch the movie, and come back, because everything from here on out is spoilers, full and enthusiastic and completely unashamed. We are deep diving into every moment of this story, and we are not coming back up until we have examined it from every possible angle. Ready? Good. Let's begin. The movie opens exactly where the original left off in spirit, if not in literal geography, with the McAllister family in full pre-vacation pandemonium. It's the Christmas season, and this enormous, wonderful, absolutely exhausting family is preparing for a holiday trip to Miami. Now, right away, the film is doing something structurally clever that rewards the audience who paid attention to the first movie. It's echoing the setup, the rushing, the packing, the chaos of moving this many human beings and their belongings through the same space at the same time, while simultaneously differentiating itself. Different destination, different backdrop, different stakes, and different problem, though the root of the problem, as we will discover, is in many ways the same. Before any of the travel mechanics kick in, though, the film takes a moment, a really important moment that I don't want to rush past, to establish the state of Kevin McAllister's emotional world at the beginning of this story. Because Kevin has not been having a good time, and the specific incident that crystallizes his not having a good time is one of the most universally, almost painfully relatable things that John Hughes and Chris Columbus ever committed to a family film. Kevin's school is putting on a Christmas pageant. He is supposed to be singing in the choir. He has been practicing. He is prepared, or at least as prepared as an 8-year-old can be for a public performance, which involves a certain amount of genuine effort and a corresponding amount of hope that something decent will come of it. And then his older brother Buzz, the magnificent Buzz McAllister, easily one of the most lovable and infuriating fictional older siblings in the history of the holiday movie genre, seizes the microphone and delivers a solo performance that is so deliberately, theatrically terrible, so committed to its own awfulness, that the audience at the pageant erupts into laughter. Not polite, uncomfortable laughter. Real laughter. Everyone finds it hilarious. The teachers, the parents, the other kids, everyone. And Kevin, watching from his spot in the choir, watching his brother steal the spotlight in the most obnoxiously Buzz McAllister way imaginable, watching everyone around him collapse into laughter at something that was supposed to be his moment too. He can't take it anymore. He shoves Buzz. It's impulsive, it's reactive. It's the kind of thing that happens when a person has been pushed past the point where their better judgment can get a word in edgewise. And when he shoves Buzz, he sets off a chain reaction. Candles knocked over, children stumbling, the entire choir collapsing like a row of very small, very festive dominoes, and the Christmas pageant becomes a disaster. A beautiful, chaotic, slapstick disaster. And in the aftermath, with everyone surveying the wreckage, the entire McAllister family descends on Kevin like a weather system. His parents are mortified. His relatives are appalled. And Buzz, in a moment of truly inspired villainy, delivers one of the great cinematic non-apologies. This perfectly crafted, theatrically generous, completely hollow apology that manages to be simultaneously condescending, self-congratulatory, and entirely unpunished. The family accepts it. They hug Buzz, and Kevin, furious and humiliated in front of every person he knows, is told to go to his room. He goes to his room, and alone up there, in the dark, with the noise of the family filtering up through the floor, he says something that is both the emotional thesis of this entire film and the line that sets everything that is about to happen in motion. He says he wishes his family would just disappear. He says he doesn't care if he ever sees any of them again. Now, if you watched the first movie, you know what comes of that wish. And the film knows you know. Hughes and Columbus are doing something here with real self-awareness, acknowledging with a kind of gentle, knowing craft that Kevin McAllister is a child who keeps arriving at the same emotional destination because the underlying problem, this fundamental feeling of not belonging within his own family, has never been truly resolved. The first movie gave him a house to defend and enemies to defeat. It gave him competence and victory, but it didn't give him the thing he actually needed, which was to be seen. And so here we are at the beginning of the second film, and Kevin is back in his room, back in his isolation, wishing again for the same thing he wished for the first time. The next morning arrives with all the violence of a family of this size attempting to be somewhere on time. Bags are packed. Cabs are called. The airport is navigated with the breathless, white-knuckle urgency that is apparently just the McAllister family's default mode for any form of travel. O'Hare International Airport swallows them whole as it has before, and the family moves in a rushing, poorly coordinated mass through terminals and gates and the general human chaos of holiday air travel in the pre-smartphone era, when losing sight of someone for 30 seconds in an airport could genuinely mean losing them, because there was no ability to text them or track their location or reach them through 17 different channels simultaneously. And Kevin, in the middle of this rush, makes the decision that will change everything. He grabs a bag, his father's bag as it turns out. Inside that bag is a Talkboy, the most magnificent piece of consumer audio technology that 1992 had to offer, a gadget that allowed its user to record and play back speech at variable speeds, which in the hands of a clever child was essentially an adult voice impersonator in a box. Also inside that bag, Peter McAllister's credit card. 2 items. 2 items that will do an enormous amount of work in the story that follows. The family runs for the gate. Kevin runs with them, or tries to, and in the specific crush of bodies and luggage and holiday travelers that fills the O'Hare concourse on a December morning, something goes wrong. Kevin grabs the hand of a man in a similar-looking coat. He follows that man. He boards, through some remarkable combination of chaos, timing, and the particular way airports in 1992 apparently didn't scrutinize unaccompanied children with the rigor one might hope for. He boards the wrong plane. His family goes to Miami. Kevin McAllister goes to New York. And this is the moment the movie makes its boldest structural choice. This is the decision that separates Home Alone 2 from being merely a rerun of its predecessor. Because Kevin doesn't land somewhere frightening and unfamiliar. He doesn't end up in a situation that requires pure survival. He steps off that plane into JFK Airport and then out into the streets of Manhattan. And what happens to his face in that moment is not fear, not panic, not the desperate scrambling of a child who needs to find safety. What happens is wonder, pure, luminous, completely unguarded wonder. His eyes get wide. His chin comes up. He looks around at this city, this enormous, electric, overwhelming, magnificent city, and he is thrilled. And this is psychologically important. This is the film telling you exactly who Kevin McAllister is. He is not a child who is frightened by bigness. He is a child who is energized by it. He is a child who has spent his entire life feeling too small for the room he's in, and he has just walked into the biggest room in the world, and his immediate response is not inadequacy. It's possibility. New York, for Kevin McAllister, is not a threat. New York is a kingdom that has just become available. What does he do first? He gets in a cab. He is taken downtown. He stands in front of the Plaza Hotel, grand and golden and absolutely imperial on the corner of 5th Avenue and Central Park South, and he walks in through the front door with the confidence of a man who owns the building, which, in his own mind, he basically does. The Plaza Hotel check-in sequence is one of the great comic set pieces in 1990s American cinema, and I want to spend real time here because it deserves real time. Kevin approaches the front desk. He deploys his Talkboy, which he has pre-recorded with an adult male voice that sounds, in the best possible way, absolutely nothing like an adult male voice but sounds enough like an adult male voice for Kevin's purposes. He presents his father's credit card. He has the practiced, slightly impatient air of a man who has checked into many hotels and finds the process mildly tedious. And through a combination of sheer audacity, creative use of his Talkboy's playback function, the particular vulnerability of service industry professionals to an aggressively confident guest, and the kind of luck that the universe reserves specifically for 8-year-olds in holiday films, he gets the suite. Tim Curry's Mr. Hector is watching all of this. And this is where I need to spend a moment celebrating what Tim Curry does in this film, because it deserves celebration. He doesn't play Mr. Hector as a buffoon. He doesn't play him as someone who is fooled because he's stupid. He plays him as a man of genuine, deep, almost devotional professional pride. A man for whom the Plaza Hotel is not just an employer but a vocation, a calling, the physical manifestation of everything he values and has worked to protect. And his suspicion about Kevin is entirely correct from their very first interaction. He knows something is wrong. His every instinct as a professional and a human being is screaming that something is wrong. The comedy comes from the gap between what he knows in his gut and what he can prove, and the escalating refinement of his attempts to close that gap while maintaining the gracious professionalism that his position demands. It is a masterclass in a very specific kind of comic acting, slow burn, status-driven, perpetually thwarted, and Tim Curry executes it with the precision of a man who has thought very carefully about exactly what makes something funny and is now doing exactly that thing with total commitment. Kevin gets to his suite, and the suite is extraordinary. It is the kind of hotel room that exists in the fantasies of every person who has ever stayed in a room with a heating system that made noise and a bathroom you had to be careful in. This room has a bathroom bigger than most New York apartments. It has a living room. It has a view. It has everything. And Kevin, standing in the middle of it in his winter coat, looks around with the expression of a person who has arrived at the correct destination and known it immediately. What follows is one of the most joyful sequences in the film. Kevin does everything. He orders every single thing on the room service menu, and is so casually, cheerfully extravagant about it that the room service staff on the other end of the phone probably thinks they're dealing with a diplomat's child. He watches the most violent movie available on the in-room television. He raids the minibar with the enthusiasm of someone who has heard about minibars their entire life and has been waiting for this moment. He runs through the hotel corridors in a bathrobe. He tips everyone he encounters, doormen, bellhops, cleaning staff, with a theatrical generosity that suggests he has seen a lot of movies about rich people and absorbed the lifestyle very efficiently. He is, in every conceivable sense, living the dream. And watching him live the dream is infectious in the most complete sense of that word. You cannot watch these sequences without smiling. It is physically impossible. You would have to be made of something other than human material to remain unmoved by the sight of a child in a bathrobe running full speed down the hallway of the Plaza Hotel at approximately 10 o'clock at night, just because he can. But here is where the film begins to do something more complicated. Because Kevin isn't just having fun. Kevin is running. He is running from the confrontation with his family, from the shame of the Christmas pageant and the aftermath with Buzz and the way his parents looked at him. He is running from the feeling of being the one who always gets it wrong. And New York, for all its glittering, electric Christmas card perfection, is not actually an answer to that. It is a very beautiful, very large distraction. And distractions, no matter how magnificent they are, eventually end. The distraction ends, or rather, it gets complicated, when Kevin is exploring the city and runs into Harry and Marv. Now, the wet bandits, the sticky bandits, Marv would like you to know, have escaped from prison. The film dispenses with the how of this fairly quickly and without much concern for plausibility, which is exactly the right decision. They've escaped. They're in New York. They're planning something. The specifics of their incarceration and escape are not the point. The point is that Kevin McAllister and the two criminals who are emotionally most significant in his recent history are now in the same city, and it is only a matter of time before the universe arranges for them to encounter each other. That encounter happens near Duncan's toy chest, a store that functions in this film as the physical embodiment of Christmas magic and childhood wonder, a place decorated with such extravagant, all-in holiday fervor that it makes every real toy store you have ever been in feel slightly underdressed. Kevin spots them. He recognizes them immediately. These two particular faces are not ones you forget when you have spent an entire Christmas Eve watching them walk into windows and fall off roofs. And in a sequence that perfectly recaptures the cat and mouse energy of the first film, Kevin manages to lead the police directly to Harry and Marv while simultaneously making himself scarce. It's a beautifully efficient little piece of comedy writing. Kevin uses the resources around him, thinks 3 steps ahead, and is completely gone before Harry and Marv can get their bearings enough to realize what just happened. But Harry and Marv get away. In the process of the confrontation and its aftermath, Kevin discovers something crucial. Something that will reshape the entire second half of this film and transform Kevin's New York adventure from a personal holiday into something with actual moral stakes. Harry and Marv are planning a robbery. Not just any robbery. They are going to hit Duncan's toy chest, and they're going to do it on Christmas Eve, the night when the store will be packed with cash donations collected for the children's hospital across the street. They are going to steal every dollar raised for sick children. It is the most cynical, mean-spirited, specifically calibrated to be monstrous crime the screenplay could have devised, and it works perfectly as a narrative engine because it makes Kevin's decision to intervene not just personally motivated but morally urgent. Kevin McAllister, 8 years old, alone in New York City with his father's credit card and a talk boy, decides he is going to stop them. This is the moment the film commits. Everything up to this point has been set up and character establishment and the sheer joy of watching Kevin navigate New York with supreme confidence. From here, it becomes a mission. And before we get to the execution of that mission, the traps, the confrontation, all of it, we need to stop and talk about 2 things that happen first. 2 encounters that are quiet and human and completely unhurried, and that give this film its soul in a way that no amount of slapstick comedy could on its own. The first is Kevin and the Bird Woman. She is in Central Park. She is always in Central Park, at least in Kevin's experience of the world during these days in New York. She is there in the mornings and the evenings, bundled against the cold, hunched slightly as though the weight of the air itself is something she has learned to carry. She is surrounded by pigeons in the kind of dense, constant, almost devotional way that most people in a city like New York instinctively give a wide berth. She is, to a casual observer, one of those urban figures that you learn to see without really seeing, part of the landscape, part of the background, not quite requiring the kind of full human attention that people who seem more immediately relevant to your life demand. Kevin approaches her. And this is important. He approaches her because he wants to, not because he has to. He doesn't need anything from her. He's not lost. He's not afraid. He approaches her because something in him, some instinct that operates below the level of his conscious strategic mind, recognizes something in her. They are both, in their own very different ways, people who exist outside the flow of the world around them. People who feel, accurately or not, that they are not quite fully part of the human community they inhabit. Their first conversation is tentative on her end and gentle on his, which is not always Kevin's default register, and that gentleness itself tells you something important about him. He is capable of reading a room, reading a person, understanding when the situation calls for softness rather than confidence. And this situation clearly calls for softness. The Bird Woman has been alone for a very long time. She explains it, how she once loved someone and trusted someone and was hurt so badly that she decided, in the aftermath of that hurt, that it was simply safer to never trust anyone again. That the only company she keeps now is her birds, because birds don't lie to you. Birds don't leave you standing in the ruins of something you built together and wondering how you got there. Birds simply are present, consistent, asking only for seed and returning only warmth. Kevin listens. He really listens, with the quality of attention that adults in their busyness and their distraction so rarely give to the lonely people they pass every day, the people who are right there in front of them asking to be seen but who have become, through accumulated urban exposure, essentially invisible. He listens and he does not rush her, and he does not look around or check his watch or deploy any of the social signals that adults use to manage conversations they want to exit gracefully. He stays. He is fully there. And this quality in him, this capacity to be present with another person's pain, is one of the most important things the film says about who Kevin McAllister actually is underneath the bravado and the ingenuity. What the Bird Woman is telling Kevin, understood through any reasonably attentive reading of the scene, is a warning and a mirror simultaneously. She is showing him what happens when you let the feeling of not belonging harden into something permanent. When you let one too many hurts calcify into a wall so high and so thick that nothing, and nobody, can find a way through. She is, without either of them knowing it in any explicit, articulated sense, a glimpse into a possible future for a boy who has a habit of wishing his family would disappear, who keeps reaching for independence as a substitute for the vulnerability of actually needing people, who has built, at 8 years old, an impressive and comprehensive set of defenses against the feeling of being left out. And Kevin, this kid who everybody in his family seems to regard as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be understood, tells her not to give up. He tells her that just because one person hurt her doesn't mean the whole world will. He tells her that she deserves to be loved, that she deserves to have someone in her corner. From the mouth of an 8-year-old boy, sitting on a park bench in the middle of Central Park in December, with snow on the ground and the city going on all around them as though nothing extraordinary is happening. I am not going to pretend that this scene doesn't get me. I'm not going to perform the kind of critical detachment that pretends a scene like this one doesn't land, doesn't work, doesn't do exactly what it set out to do. Because it does all of those things. It absolutely does. And the reason it does them is not sentimentality, and it's not manipulation, and it's not the musical score doing emotional work that the writing hasn't earned. It works because it's true. Because the thing Kevin is telling the Bird Woman is the same thing that Kevin, on some level, needs to be told himself. And the fact that he's able to articulate it to someone else before he can fully receive it himself, That is a psychologically real and deeply human thing. That is how people actually work. We are often better at giving the advice we need than taking it. Their relationship, this tentative and genuine and unlikely friendship between a lonely woman and a determined boy, becomes one of the film's quiet emotional through lines, running underneath the comedy and the caper and the trap preparation, surfacing periodically to remind you what's actually at stake in this story. The payoff, when it arrives at the end of the trap sequence, when Kevin calls for help and she answers in the most extraordinary way she knows how, is one of the most genuinely moving moments in a film that could very easily have contented itself with delivering laughs and nothing else. The fact that it didn't, the fact that it reached for something more, that is the difference between a good holiday movie and one that becomes a tradition. The second crucial encounter before the machinery of the trap sequence kicks in is Kevin at the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. Alone, at night, looking up. There is a version of this scene that could collapse into something saccharine and easy. Poor little lost child, alone in the big city, sad at Christmas, cue the swelling strings and the single tear. But Columbus and Culkin refuse that reading with complete confidence. They play it with a quietness, a stillness that is almost contemplative. Kevin looks up at that tree, and it is an extraordinary sight. Tens of thousands of lights on a Christmas tree so large it challenges your capacity to fully comprehend it as a single object, blazing in the dark, reflected in the surrounding windows of Rockefeller Center, and behind it the black New York sky, and above that whatever stars can compete with the city's own light. He looks up at it, and you can read on his face the specific ache of wanting to share something beautiful with someone you love. Not generic loneliness, not self-pity, something more precise and more human than that. He thinks about his family. He misses them, not in a dramatic, tear-drenched, operatic way, but in the way that any person who has ever been somewhere extraordinary alone has missed the specific people who would make being there even better. The people whose presence would transform the experience from something merely witnessed to something fully lived. And it is in this moment, this quiet, unhurried, beautifully composed moment, that Kevin makes a wish. He takes back what he said the night of the pageant. He doesn't want his family to disappear. He wants them here with him looking up at this tree. He wants to belong to them, and he wants them to belong to him. And the only way to make that happen is to find them simultaneously, and the film handles this intercutting with real care. Kate McAllister is somewhere in New York City, because the family figured out that Kevin didn't make it to Miami. Because of course they did, eventually. And Kate is not simply worried. Kate is haunted. This is a woman who has been through this before, who has the specific, permanent, Category 5 guilt of a mother whose child was left behind, and the particular horror of it having happened again, differently this time but happening again, is something that Catherine O'Hara carries in her posture and her eyes and the specific quality of urgency in her movements throughout every scene she's in. She is not performing maternal panic for the camera. She is inhabiting it, and the result is that Kate McAllister, who could very easily have been a supporting character in what is structurally Kevin's movie, functions as a genuine emotional second protagonist, someone whose scenes provide an anchor of real-world weight that keeps the film from floating entirely away into the pleasant cartoon physics of its comedy sequences. Kate's journey through New York, the calls she makes, the people she talks to, the dead ends and the narrow misses, is intercut throughout the film's middle section, and each time we cut to her, the stakes of Kevin's situation are recalibrated. Each time you see her face, you are reminded, this is a real child. This is a real city. This matters in a way that goes beyond the comedy. Now, the traps. We have been building to this. We have done the emotional work and established the stakes and examined the characters. And now it is time to talk about the thing that everyone, if they are being honest with themselves, was at least partly here for. Kevin, having identified the threat and made the decision to meet it, needs to prepare. He goes to his uncle's brownstone, a house on the Upper West Side that belongs to a member of the McAllister family and is, by the extraordinary narrative convenience that is the true unsung hero of this franchise, completely empty and in the middle of renovation, which means it is full of tools, construction materials, the kind of implements that, in the hands of a creative and strategically minded child with a deep commitment to the principle of proportional escalation, become something else entirely. The preparation sequence, the shopping, the planning, the setting up, is almost as satisfying as the execution. This is something the Home Alone films understand instinctively, the pleasure of anticipation, the pleasure of watching a plan take shape before you see it deployed. Kevin moves through the brownstone with the focus of an architect who has been given a very specific brief. He doesn't see the space as it is. He sees it as it could be, as a machine, a system, a controlled environment in which every element has been assigned a role in the larger choreography of what is about to happen to two men who should have stayed in prison. The shopping that precedes this, accomplished naturally with Peter McAllister's credit card, which deserves its own place in the fictional financial history of American cinema, is a delight in itself. Kevin goes to a hardware store and a hobby shop and a craft store, and the items he selects, if assembled into a single invoice, would raise extremely serious questions at any bank that happened to review the transaction. Paint, adhesives, wire, nails, a nail gun, a staple gun, various mechanisms, various tools. No adult in any of these establishments thinks twice about the transaction, which is the franchise's way of reminding you that you are in a world where the normal rules of retail exist to serve the story rather than the other way around, and you can either accept that premise or spend the rest of your life being annoyed by it. I choose acceptance, fully and without reservation. Harry and Marv arrive at the brownstone expecting a straightforward smash and grab situation. In and out, no complications, the kind of job that two career criminals with their combined experience should be able to execute in their sleep. What they find instead is something that would be recognized by anyone with even a rudimentary understanding of military strategy as a well-prepared, multi-stage defensive position from which every possible approach has been considered and accounted for. Kevin has not just set traps. Kevin has designed an experience. The first thing that happens to Marv, and it is always Marv who goes first, this is the iron law of the franchise, the cosmological constant around which everything else orbits, is a paint can. Specifically, two paint cans, swung from above on a wire, connecting with Marv's head in rapid succession. The timing of the double hit, the first impact, the brief moment where Marv's expression cycles through pain and disbelief and the dawning comprehension that something very bad is about to happen again, followed immediately by the second impact, is comedic timing at its most precise and most merciless. Daniel Stern is, in these moments, working at the absolute peak of his considerable gifts as a physical comedian. He is not merely falling or reacting. He is performing. Each pratfall is calibrated. Each expression is chosen. Each moment of dawning horror or stunned disorientation is held for exactly the right number of frames before the next thing happens. He brings to these scenes a kind of total, all-in bodily commitment that transforms what could have been simple stunt work into genuine character comedy. What happens to Harry is different in quality and register. Joe Pesci plays Harry with a suppressed fury that never quite finds safe release, a rage that keeps getting redirected by circumstance and that builds, throughout the trap sequence, into something almost geological. When Harry puts his hand on a scalding hot doorknob, a doorknob that Kevin has connected to a heat source, the burn is immediate and total, and Pesci's reaction is extraordinary. The pain is real and immediate and physical, but what Pesci adds, underneath the physical performance, is the specific anguish of a man whose pride has been injured as badly as his hand. Harry is not just hurt. Harry is humiliated, again, by a child, by the same child, and that humiliation, sitting on top of the physical pain, amplifying it, giving it a quality that goes beyond mere hurt into something approaching genuine suffering, is what makes Pesci's performance so consistently darkly funny throughout this sequence. He is a man at war with his own dignity, and he is losing. The staple gun sequence follows, and this one operates on a different comic register entirely. It's quicker, sharper. The pain is more specific, and the image of staples in a grown man's scalp is one that the film deploys with the confidence of a comedian who knows they have gone slightly too far, and that slightly too far is exactly where they need to be. Pesci's reaction, the way his hand goes to his head, the way his eyes go wide, the way the realization moves across his face in slow motion, is one of the film's genuine comic highlights. He plays it without flinching and without breaking the internal logic of Harry's character, which is that every new indignity is processed through the filter of a man who considers himself to be significantly more capable than the universe keeps demonstrating him to be. There is a sequence involving a toilet pipe rigged to spray at high pressure, and the collision between Marv's face and that specific form of justice is so perfectly set up and so completely deserved that the audience in theaters apparently cheered. There are BB gun pellets, small, sharp, precise, and deployed from a strategically positioned shooter that gives Kevin both physical and psychological distance from the violence he is orchestrating. There is a nail that enters Marv's bare foot, bare because Marv has removed his shoe for reasons that seemed logical to him at the time and that seemed logical to nobody else. And Daniel Stern's journey through the emotional stages of stepping on a nail barefoot in a New York brownstone at Christmastime constitutes a kind of condensed dramatic monologue unto itself. Pain. Disbelief. More pain. The specific, weary comprehension that this is simply his life now. And then the paint cans again, but this time swung from the full height of a 3-story drop, connecting with both Harry and Marv in ways that, if you stop and think about the actual force involved, are genuinely terrifying. These men should not be walking after this. They should not be standing after this. The laws of physics and medicine and basic anatomical survivability say that what happens to Harry and Marv in this brownstone should produce 2 bodies rather than 2 criminals who get up, dust themselves off, and continue pursuing a child through Manhattan. But the Home Alone universe operates on a different set of physical laws, a set of laws that is internally consistent, aesthetically coherent, and completely divorced from any relationship to medical reality. And once you accept those laws, once you lean into the cartoon physics and let them wash over you, the result is pure, cathartic, uncomplicated joy. Kevin lures Harry and Marv out of the brownstone and into Central Park, into the dark, into the cold, into the territory that belongs, in this film's particular geography, to the bird woman. And this is where everything that the movie has been carefully constructing, the relationship with the bird woman, the theme of trust, the idea that connection is braver than isolation, comes together in one extraordinary, tonally surprising moment. Kevin calls for help. He calls for the bird woman, and she is there. She is there with her birds around her, and she releases them, all of them, in a great, sweeping, supernatural feeling cloud of wings that fills the winter sky above Central Park and then descends on Harry and Marv with the organized chaos of a force of nature. It is absurd. It is absolutely, completely, unambiguously absurd. It is also, in a way that catches you off guard, briefly beautiful. The way Columbus shoots it, the birds filling the frame, the white wings against the gray December sky, the almost allegorical quality of all that held back capacity for connection suddenly set free, gives the sequence a weight and a strangeness that briefly transcends the genre it's operating in. Harry and Marv, overwhelmed and blinded, stumble directly into the NYPD, who arrive with the specific, professional skepticism of New York police officers who have seen everything and are prepared to believe that what they are looking at might be one more entry in the long and storied catalog of things they have seen that made no immediate sense. Harry and Marv are handcuffed, arrested, and Marv, in a moment of extraordinary self-determination that perfectly captures everything essential about his character, proudly announces to the arresting officers that they are the sticky bandits. The cop's face does something complicated. The case is closed. Kevin returns to the Plaza Hotel. His father's credit card has, at this point, triggered enough alerts that Mr. Hector has finally assembled enough evidence to act on his suspicions. The suspicions he has been nursing since the moment Kevin walked through the front door with his talk boy and his 8-year-old confidence. The family is converging on the hotel from multiple directions simultaneously. Peter McAllister is there. The cousins and uncles and aunts are filtering back from Miami. And Kate is somewhere in New York, still searching, still moving. The reunion between Kevin and his mother happens at Rockefeller Center. In front of the tree. The same tree he stood in front of alone and made his wish. And Columbus, to his enormous credit, does not inflate this moment. He does not put a speech in front of it or a dramatic explanation or a theatrical apology or a carefully worded articulation of everything that led to this point. He simply lets Kate find her son. He lets her hold him, and he holds her back. And in the silence of that, in the simple physical fact of a mother and her child, found in the most beautiful spot in New York City on Christmas Eve, everything else that has happened in this film becomes context for this. The Plaza Hotel and the traps and the sticky bandits and the talk boy and Tim Curry's magnificent expressions of professional suspicion. All of it was context. This was the story. The family reunites in full. The chaos that is the McAllister family at full complement descends on the Plaza Hotel with the benevolent destructive force of a natural phenomenon. And Kevin, who has had approximately 3 days of total autonomy in the greatest city in the world and spent it thinking about the people he wanted to share it with, has one more thing to do. He has gotten gifts. For everyone. Purchased, naturally, with his father's credit card, which by this point has probably flagged at credit card companies in at least 4 states and generated some very interesting conversations in the fraud prevention department. The gifts are specific, thoughtful. The kind of gifts that can only be chosen by someone who has been paying close attention to the people around them, even when those people believed they weren't being watched. Kevin has seen his family all along, more clearly in many ways than they have seen him. The kid who everyone thinks is the difficult one, the one who causes scenes and breaks things and always seems to be at the center of whatever goes wrong. That kid has been watching and listening and loving his family with complete fidelity the entire time. And one final gift, the one that says everything, the recovered donations from Duncan's toy chest, delivered in full to the children's hospital. Kevin didn't have to do this. Nobody asked him to. Nobody would have known if he hadn't. And he did it anyway. He did it because the children who needed that money needed it more than anyone else. And because Kevin McAllister, underneath the bravado and the ingenuity and the slight overconfidence and the habit of wishing his family would disappear, is fundamentally, constitutively generous. That is who he is. That is what the film is, in its quietest and most essential moments, arguing about childhood and about people. That the one who seems most difficult is sometimes the one who cares most deeply. Kevin's final scene with the bird woman is exactly what it needs to be. He goes to Central Park one last time. She is there. She thanks him. He tells her he'll see her next year. And she smiles. A real, full, unguarded smile. The first one we've seen from her in the entire film. And you understand in that smile that something genuine has changed in her life. That one conversation, and then one act of faith in the dark, and then one moment of connection over something as simple as pigeons in a park, has opened something that she had sealed shut. That Kevin McAllister, 8 years old, inadvertently and through no particular design of his own, has given this lonely woman something back that she thought was gone forever. That is the movie. That is Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, in its fullness. And now let's talk about what it actually means, what it's actually doing, because this film, which most critical discussions file under adequate but unnecessary sequel, is doing things that deserve a much more careful reading than it typically gets. Kevin McAllister is one of the most psychologically interesting child protagonists in the American family film canon, and I will defend that claim at length against any challenger. He is not a perfect child. He is not humble. He does not easily accept correction or discipline. He has, if we're being fully honest, a chip on his shoulder the size of a small state. He is often, and the film does not hide this, genuinely a lot. The Christmas pageant incident is real. He did shove Buzz. He does escalate situations. He does have a habit of making his feelings extremely legible to everyone in the room in the most dramatic way available. And yet the film neither excuses this nor punishes him for it. It presents him as he is: complicated, capable, loving, difficult, occasionally insufferable, fundamentally generous. And it trusts the audience to follow him through all of it without the narrative having to resolve his contradictions for them. This is sophisticated character writing for what is nominally a broad family comedy. It respects the audience enough to not flatten Kevin into either a hero or a victim, but to let him be a real, three-dimensional, occasionally exasperating human child. What Kevin is performing throughout the film's first 2 acts is adulthood. He is doing an impression of the person he believes he should be allowed to be: competent, independent, in command, answerable to nobody. The Plaza Hotel check-in is the purest expression of this performance. A child in a bathrobe doing an impression of a businessman, and doing it well enough to fool an entire hotel full of professionally trained adults. There's something both triumphant and quietly heartbreaking about how good he is at this. Because the reason he's so good at performing adulthood is that he has spent the entirety of his young life trying to be taken seriously in a family that has, for whatever combination of reasons, consistently failed to take him seriously. He has developed the skill out of necessity, and that skill is extraordinary. And it is also, in some small way, a loss. Macaulay Culkin's performance in this film is, I would argue, slightly better than his work in the original, and that is a bold claim given how revelatory the original performance was. But Culkin in 1992 is doing something with more interior complexity than Culkin in 1990. The fear in the first film was immediate and reactive and externally visible. It was exactly the kind of big, legible, emotional performance that camera and screen reward. The emotion in this film is quieter, more held, more resident in the spaces between expressions than in the expressions themselves. The Rockefeller Center scene, the Central Park conversations, the moment when Kevin receives his mother's embrace at the end of the film and you can see, in his face, the relief of someone who has been holding themselves very carefully together for a very long time and has finally been given permission to let go. This is the work of a genuinely talented young actor who is growing and developing in real time, in front of the camera, under the pressure of being the most famous child in America. Joe Pesci's Harry and Daniel Stern's Marv are, as I mentioned earlier, one of the great comic pairings of the decade. But what I want to add here is that Pesci's work in this film specifically does something that gets lost in the general appreciation for the slapstick. He makes Harry feel genuinely, dangerously angry. Not cartoonishly angry. Not villain in a children's movie angry. The rage that Pesci brings to Harry is rooted in something real, in humiliation, in thwarted pride, in the specific anguish of a man who has a particular self-image that the universe keeps assaulting. And because that anger feels real, the moments where it is redirected into physical comedy feel funnier than they would if Harry were simply a buffoon. The contrast between the genuine menace and the ridiculous outcome is where the comedy lives. Catherine O'Hara does something in this film that I think represents some of her finest screen work. She plays Kate McAllister as a woman who is genuinely, quietly frightened in a way that has moved past the acute phase of panic into something more chronic and more serious. There's a stillness to her fear that is more affecting than any amount of visible distress could be. She has been here before. She knows what it is to lose her child, and knowing it a second time, living through the specific horror of it having happened again, is something O'Hara carries in her body throughout the film. The reunion she delivers at the end of the film, the relief, the love, the tears that arrive not dramatically but simply, as a physical response to the ending of fear, is real and human and beautiful. The themes that run through this film are, as I've suggested, richer than its reputation as a holiday comedy typically acknowledges. The central theme is belonging, the desire to be part of something, the terror of that desire, and the long road back to accepting it. Kevin begins the story wishing his family would disappear and ends it wishing they were with him. That arc is simple but it's true. It's emotionally honest in a way that doesn't require sophisticated plot mechanics. It just requires a character who is allowed to feel something real, and a filmmaker who is willing to let that feeling sit without immediately resolving it. Underneath belonging is the theme of trust. The bird woman has stopped trusting because she was hurt. Kevin keeps escaping into independence because dependence feels dangerous. The film is, in both of these characters, exploring the same fear from different angles. The fear that opening yourself to another person gives that person the capacity to hurt you, and the specific cost over time of protecting yourself against that hurt. The bird woman has paid that cost for years. Kevin is on the verge of beginning to pay it. And the film's argument, delivered not through speeches or explicit moral instruction but through the simple fact of what happens between them in Central Park, is that the cost of isolation exceeds the cost of vulnerability. That being hurt is survivable. That trust, even imperfect trust, even trust that has to be rebuilt from almost nothing, is worth it. The theme of generosity runs through the entire film like a current under everything else. Kevin tips. Kevin donates. Kevin gives his time to the bird woman. Kevin gives the toy store donations to the hospital. He gives and gives and gives throughout a story that gives him every opportunity to take. A credit card, an empty brownstone, a city full of things to consume, and he consistently, without fanfare, without expecting reward, chooses generosity. This is not made explicit. The film does not hold up a sign saying Kevin is generous. It simply puts him in situations where generosity is an option and watches what he does. And what he does every time is give. That is a character statement. That is a film saying something about who this child is and why he is worth rooting for even when he is being difficult. From a craft perspective, Home Alone 2 represents a significant step forward for Chris Columbus as a director. The visual language is more assured than it was in the first film. The cinematography by Julio Mackett brings New York to life in a way that is both romantic and specific. This is not a generic city dressed for Christmas, but Manhattan in particular, with its particular light and scale and texture, shot with a golden warmth that makes every exterior sequence feel like something that exists slightly outside of ordinary time. The Plaza Hotel interiors are shot with a hushed grandeur that serves as perfect comic contrast to Kevin's casual confidence. The brownstone trap sequence is staged with more sophisticated camera movement than its equivalent in the first film. The geography of the space is established clearly and maintained carefully throughout, so that the audience always understands exactly where everyone is and what is about to happen to them. John Williams returned to compose the score, and the music is one of the film's genuine pleasures. Building on the thematic foundation of the original, Somewhere in My Memory remains one of the most effective holiday film themes ever written. Williams brings a different energy to the New York material, jazzier, bigger, more urban, alive with the particular rhythm of the city. The emotional scenes are scored with a restraint that honors their quietness. The trap sequence has the kinetic, percussive energy of a piece of music that knows exactly when to land its accents and when to let the physical comedy breathe. This is master film scoring, the kind that most viewers don't consciously notice because it is doing its work so seamlessly. The editing maintains the rhythmic precision that made the first film's trap sequence so satisfying. The comedy beats land exactly where they should. The pauses are held for exactly the right duration. The cutaways arrive at the precise moment that maximizes the impact of what you're about to see. This is craft at a high level, unglamorous, and essential. Now, in the spirit of genuine criticism rather than pure celebration, Home Alone 2 has real weaknesses that deserve honest acknowledgement. The middle section of the film, the stretch between Kevin's establishment in New York and the beginning of the trap preparation, is loose. It sags. The Tim Curry sequences, which are individually brilliant, are extended past the point where their comedy is generating maximum returns. There are stretches where the film is clearly marking time, moving pieces around the board without really advancing either the story or the emotional arc. Kevin's father is given almost nothing to do for most of the film, which is a waste of John Hurd's considerable presence. And some of the coincidences that keep Kevin and the criminals in each other's orbit, in a city of 8 million people, strain even the generous credulity that this genre typically requests. The film is also, in comparison to the original, clearly working with less novelty. The first Home Alone had the enormous structural advantage of being something audiences had never seen before in quite that specific combination. The second film cannot replicate that advantage. It is working in the space that the first film cleared, and the best it can do, and it does this competently and sometimes brilliantly, is use that space differently rather than expanding it. But here is the honest bottom line. Home Alone 2 is significantly better than its critical reputation suggests, and its legacy has been undervalued by a tendency to measure it primarily against the original, rather than against the full landscape of what holiday family films actually look like. In that landscape, in comparison to the sequels and remakes that the franchise subsequently produced, in comparison to the broader genre of Christmas comedies made in the same era and after, this film holds up. Not just as a nostalgic artifact, as an actual, functioning film with real characters, genuine emotional moments, brilliant comic performances, and enough care for its own material to earn the feelings it reaches for. It is the last genuinely inspired entry in the Home Alone franchise. And it is, for the audience that grew up with it, something close to irreplaceable, not because it is perfect, but because it is the film that was playing when they were the right age to let it in completely. When the Plaza Hotel seemed like the most magnificent place in the world. When New York at Christmas seemed like a dream you could walk into if you were brave enough. When a little boy standing in front of a glittering tree, alone, wishing for his family back, was the most emotionally real image in the universe. My final rating for Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, is a firm, affectionate, fully considered 7.5 out of 10. It earns that rating not through perfection but through genuine achievement. It makes you laugh hard, repeatedly, in ways that do not diminish with repeated viewing. It makes you feel something true about what it is to be a child who loves people who don't always see them clearly. It makes New York at Christmas look like the most beautiful place any human being has ever conceived. And it sneaks up on you in a park with some pigeons and a lonely woman and a boy who chose to sit down beside her. And it makes you feel something you were not entirely prepared to feel in the middle of a comedy about paint cans. Kevin McAllister stood in front of the greatest Christmas tree in the world and wished for the right thing. He fought 2 criminals and won because he always wins, because he is Kevin McAllister and winning is what he does. He tipped everyone he met. He donated to the children. He sat with a lonely woman in the cold and gave her his time. And then his mother found him, and Christmas was saved. And somewhere in Central Park, the birds flew free and a woman smiled for the first time in a very long time. Keep the change, you filthy animal. And now, because we have not yet gone everywhere this film deserves to go, let's talk more specifically about the world this movie exists in. The cultural moment it was born into. And what that moment meant for the film's reception, its legacy, and the way it has aged over 3 decades. 1992 was a specific kind of year in America. It was an election year, Bill Clinton defeating George H.W. Bush after 12 years of Republican administration, a shift in the national mood that was palpable in the culture of the era. The economy was emerging from a recession. There was a particular quality of restlessness in the American air, a sense that things were in the process of changing, that the 1980s version of success and aspiration was being reevaluated in real time. And into that specific cultural atmosphere, a movie about an 8-year-old kid checking himself into the Plaza Hotel with his father's stolen credit card and spending roughly the GDP of a small nation on room service and tips. That movie hit differently than it might have in a more economically confident moment. Because Kevin McAllister's adventure in New York is, among other things, a fantasy of affluence. The Plaza Hotel was not just any hotel. In 1992, the Plaza was a cultural symbol of old money, of serious wealth, of the kind of establishment that existed in a different social register than most Americans occupied. Checking a child into the plaza was a comic provocation. It was John Hughes taking a middle-class kid from the Chicago suburbs, because whatever money the McAllisters have, they are identifiably middle-class in their chaos and their family dynamics and the specific texture of their daily life, and dropping him into the lap of old New York luxury, and watching what happened when those two worlds collided. The comedy of the Tim Curry scenes is partly a comedy of class. Mr. Hector is the guardian of a world that Kevin has not been admitted to by birth, and the fact that Kevin gets in anyway through sheer, magnificent, unembarrassed nerve is democratically satisfying in a way that plays very well for the specific audience it was aimed at. The New York of 1992 was also a specific city that no longer exists. The mid-1990s transformation of Manhattan, the Times Square cleanup, the Giuliani-era aggressive policing, the gradual gentrification that would change the character of neighborhood after neighborhood over the following 2 decades, was just beginning. The New York that Kevin McAllister navigated was still carrying the edge and the grit of the city it had been in the 1970s and 1980s. It was still a city with genuine dangers, genuine rough edges, places that felt genuinely unpredictable. And Columbus chose, deliberately and brilliantly, to shoot the city not as it was but as it felt in the imagination of a child who had grown up hearing about it. He shot the Christmas New York, the magical New York, the New York of Rockefeller Center and the Plaza Hotel and Central Park in Winter and Fifth Avenue strung with lights. He shot the New York that people dream about when they think about being there at Christmas. And that choice, that decision to present the city as the most romantic possible version of itself, is what makes the New York sequences feel timeless rather than dated. It's also worth noting what the film does with Kevin's relationship to money throughout. He has access to his father's credit card, and he uses it with a freedom that is both funny and slightly vertiginous if you think about it too hard. But the film is careful, and this is subtle, but it's there, to show Kevin's generosity with money as categorically different from mere spending. He doesn't hoard. He doesn't save. He doesn't make financial decisions based on self-interest. He tips everyone, not because tipping is expected of hotel guests, but because he has registered that these are people performing labor and that the money in his pocket can make their day better. He donates not because anyone is watching, but because sick children deserve their Christmas. He is, in his relationship to money, a child who treats wealth as a tool for human connection rather than a marker of status or a resource to be accumulated. Contrast this with Harry and Marv, who are stealing from sick children. The moral geometry of this film is not subtle. Kevin gives, Harry and Marv take, but it is consistent and it is purposeful. And it gives Kevin's ultimate victory over the criminals an extra dimension of satisfaction. He doesn't just outmaneuver them physically and strategically. He outclasses them morally. He is, in the most fundamental sense, a better person operating with better values. And in a family film, perhaps especially in a holiday family film, that moral grounding matters. It is what allows the trap sequence to be as violent as it is without ever feeling mean. We want Harry and Marv to suffer because they were going to steal from sick children. The suffering feels earned in the deepest possible way. Let's talk about Buzz for a moment. Buzz McAllister is one of the great underappreciated antagonists of the 1990s family film, and I mean antagonist in the technical sense, the force in the story that generates the inciting conflict, the figure whose actions set everything else in motion, rather than the villain sense. Buzz is not evil. Buzz is something more interesting and more real than evil. Buzz is an older sibling who has discovered, with devastating efficiency, exactly how to get under his younger brother's skin. He knows Kevin. He knows what Kevin cares about. He knows how to trigger the specific vulnerabilities that Kevin carries around with him, the need to be taken seriously, the raw sensitivity about his place in the family, the hair-trigger quality of his self-regard when he believes he is being disrespected. And Buzz uses that knowledge with the casual, almost absent-minded cruelty of someone who doesn't even have to think about it anymore. It's second nature. habit. The Christmas pageant incident is Buzz's masterwork. He sets it up, executes it perfectly, and then escapes the consequences with an apology so theatrically insincere that it would be recognized as such by any adult paying attention and somehow gets accepted by every adult in the room. And Kevin is left holding the bag. Again, this is the pattern that Kevin has been living inside for his entire childhood, and it is important that we understand it clearly, because it's the engine that drives everything that follows. Kevin is not an inherently difficult child. Kevin is a child who has been placed in a situation, birth order, family dynamics, the particular way that large families assign roles to their members, that consistently puts him in the position of the one who responds rather than the one who acts. And when the one who responds finally snaps and shoves the one who acts, the one who responds gets the blame. This is not justice. And Kevin knows it isn't justice. And the knowing of it, the accumulated weight of all the times it hasn't been just, is what he carries into New York with him. The resolution of Kevin's arc with his family doesn't explicitly address this. It doesn't need to. What it does is more honest. It shows Kevin choosing his family not because they have been proved right or because he has been vindicated, but simply because he loves them. Because the Christmas tree in the dark showed him what life feels like without them, and the answer was that it feels incomplete. Beautiful, in a way, New York at Christmas is genuinely beautiful even when you're alone in it, but incomplete. And that is the mature understanding. Not, my family was wrong and now they're sorry. Not, I was right and now they know it. Simply, I love these people, and loving them means choosing them, imperfections and all, chaos and all, buzz and all. There is something to be said, too, about the role that physical space plays in this film. The first Home Alone was defined by its containment, a single house, a defensive position, a known environment that Kevin could master completely. The sequel, by contrast, is defined by openness. New York is vast. It is overwhelming. It does not reduce to a blueprint the way a suburban house does. Kevin cannot control New York the way he controlled his family's home. And the film is aware of this. There is a quality to Kevin's navigation of the city that is different from his navigation of the McAllister house. He is confident in New York, but he is not in control of it. He is a participant in its chaos rather than the architect of it. And that shift, from controller to participant, is part of the emotional journey the film is asking him to take. You cannot control love the way you can control a building. You cannot booby-trap your way into belonging. At some point you have to simply show up, be there, and trust. The geography of the final sequence, Kevin in Central Park, the bird woman above him, Harry and Marv below, the city all around, is the spatial equivalent of everything the film has been about. Kevin is in the middle. He is not alone, but he is also not hiding behind walls. He is exposed, vulnerable, surrounded by both threat and help simultaneously. He has made himself available, and the help comes. It comes from the person he took the time to see, the person he sat with in the cold and listened to, the person whose trust he helped to restore. The geography is moral. It is the film's argument in physical form. I also want to spend a moment on what Home Alone 2 does with the idea of New York as a character in itself. Columbus is clearly in love with this city, and that love is legible in every exterior shot he takes. But what's interesting is the specific version of the city he chooses to fall in love with, and more importantly, the version of the city he asks Kevin to fall in love with. It's not the gritty New York. It's not the dangerous New York that the year 1992 could also very credibly have provided. It's the New York of Christmas windows on Fifth Avenue and horse-drawn carriages in Central Park and the Plaza Hotel lit up against the evening sky. It is the New York that exists in the most generous version of its own mythology. And Kevin, arriving in this city from the outside, from the Chicago suburbs where his whole life has been defined by family dynamics and Christmas pageants and not quite fitting in, he sees it immediately. He falls in love with it immediately. And his love for New York is inseparable from the freedom he feels there, the freedom of being somewhere that doesn't already know what role he plays, where he can be anyone, where he can check into the Plaza Hotel and be Mr. McAllister for a long weekend. that love is real and it is beautiful and it is also, ultimately, not enough. Because freedom from definition is not the same as being truly known. And Kevin discovers this, not through any explicit revelation or dramatic confrontation, but through the gentle accumulation of moments. The bird woman who knew loneliness better than anyone. The Christmas tree that was more beautiful with company in his mind than it was alone in front of him. The hotel room that was enormous and luxurious and completely silent in the particular way that rooms are silent when there is nobody in them who belongs to you. What the film is giving Kevin, what New York gives him over the course of these few days, is the experience of being free without being loved, and the recognition that freedom without love is a beautiful prison. A prison with extraordinary room service and a spectacular view, but a prison nonetheless. And the value of that recognition, in a child as capable and self-reliant as Kevin McAllister, is enormous. Because Kevin could have kept going. He could have kept living on his father's credit card and running through hotel lobbies in his bathrobe indefinitely, or at least until someone came and collected him. He could have turned his New York adventure into an ongoing reality. And he doesn't. He chooses to go back. He chooses his family. Not because he is caught or because he has no choice or because the credit card finally runs out. He chooses them because he understands now what he would be choosing instead. The film's treatment of Christmas as a theme and as a visual language is worth examining separately. Columbus shoots Christmas the way certain cinematographers shoot weather, as a total environment, something that changes the quality of the light and the texture of everything it touches. The Christmas sequences in New York are not simply decorated sets. They feel genuinely, immersively festive in a way that goes beyond production design into something almost atmospheric. The lights have a quality. The snow has a texture. The air feels cold even through a screen. And this total commitment to creating the experience of Christmas, not just illustrating it, but actually recreating its particular sensory reality, is what elevates the film from a holiday comedy to a holiday experience. You don't just watch it during Christmas. You watch it to feel like it's Christmas. That is a rare and valuable thing for any film to be able to deliver. The decision to set the film in New York rather than somewhere else, rather than, say, another city or a different country or a more exotic location, is worth considering as a deliberate creative choice rather than a convenience. New York at Christmas is the most iconic holiday image in American culture after the Christmas tree itself. It is the setting of countless holiday films, countless holiday songs, countless holiday cards and advertisements and dream sequences. It is the platonic ideal of the urban Christmas. And by setting his film there, Columbus is not just choosing a location. He is choosing to place Kevin McAllister at the very center of the cultural mythology of Christmas in America. He is saying, this child, this particular child who feels like he doesn't belong anywhere, belongs here, at the center, in the most Christmassy place in the world. And maybe that is the film's final, most generous argument, that the children who feel like they don't fit, who always seem to be in the wrong place, saying the wrong thing, getting the blame for the wrong reasons, those children belong everywhere. But most of all, they belong at Christmas, at the tree, with their families, found. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, 7.5 out of 10. A film with genuine flaws and genuine heart and a performance from a 12-year-old boy that deserved more serious critical attention than it received. A film about New York and about Christmas and about pigeons and about paint cans and about, underneath all of those things, the terrible and essential bravery of loving people who don't always see you clearly. A film that I will watch every December for the rest of my life, probably, and probably feel something real during the Central Park scenes every single time. Merry Christmas. Keep the change.